George Magnus is Senior Economic Advisor at UBS Investment Bank, and he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. George Magnus, I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago, and already then we were saying, can we have a reprofiling? Do we need a restructuring of Greece? Today, it seems that the waters really are murked. Some politicians say a reprofiling will be an orderly way to refinance the country, but essentially, is reprofiling the same as restructuring?
Well, it's a nice term for the same thing, and restructuring is actually just another nice term for in effect, some form of default. But I think that the overwhelming kind of consensus at the moment, certainly in officialdom, is very much opposed to the idea of doing this, quote, reprofiling or restructuring. And nowhere more so, of course, as we know from the European Central Bank. Actually, I think this is actually a very damaging change in the whole evolution of the European sovereign crisis, because I think actually this is what's going to happen sooner or later. And I think the sooner we do it, the more orderly it might be. The longer we leave it, the more messy I think it'll become.
Yes, and at the moment it does seem to be really a square off between the politicians. For example, Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker today saying that actually reprofiling is what needs to be done, and the ECB board members saying actually reprofiling will be a disaster. Are they just trying to delay it to 2013? And how much of a disaster would that be?
Yeah, well, I think there clearly is this dichotomy now between some political thinking amongst some European leaders, and you know, let's face it. I mean, Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany has already said, you know, that from 2013, the idea of some kind of, you know, private sector involvement and restructuring would be acceptable, but not now. But of course, the political leadership and the ECB are at opposite ends of this spectrum. And that's not really very helpful, particularly from the point of view of investor confidence, because obviously leadership and coherent leadership is clearly what we need, and we're not really getting it. So, I mean, I think that this is laboring towards a reprofiling or restructuring, but...
Is there a trigger point? For example, we see, you know, on two-year Greek debt, it's at 25.6 at the moment. Is there going to be a trigger point where actually they just won't be able to get the money from Europe?
Well, I think the trigger point may just as easily be some kind of political rupture, whether it's in Greece or, you know, somewhere else, or whether it's within the you know, the negotiations within the European group of leaders and central bankers. But certainly, I mean, there could, of course, be continued you know, inclination on the part of investors to shun sovereign debt. But as you said in your lead into the package, I mean, obviously at the moment there are investors, particularly in Asia, that are quite happy to take on the risk.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure why, but anyway, that's... Yeah.
George Magnus, what do you make of Francine Lagarde's bid to be head of the IMF? How damaging will it be if it actually goes to an emerging market candidate? Will Europe suffer from the fact that they don't have a European at the helm?
Well, you know, I think that the idea about, you know, Europeans always being at the head of the IMF, I mean, it's an anachronism, and it's a post-World War II kind of set up, which obviously belonged to a different time. So, to be honest, I don't think there should be any pretense, you know, that a European or an emerging market candidate should be. I mean, this kind of positive discrimination bit, I think, is very damaging. It should be awarded on merit to the best candidate. But obviously, you know, that consensus, obviously, it's too quick for that to happen at this point.
George, who is the best candidate? Very quickly.
Who is the best candidate? Well, I mean, I don't really have a problem at all with Christine Lagarde being the candidate, since she's only one of two candidates who've put their hats into the ring, as it were, informally at least.
Yeah.
So she'll be fine, I'm sure.